On this Saturday night, state of emergency. Dozens of powerful tornadoes carve a path of death and destruction through the U.S. The heartbreaking and harrowing stories of survival. Budget backlash. Why are the feds forking out for phones no one's using? Anxiety and uncertainty 1 year on.
You should be able to feed your child no matter what.
The long-standing baby formula shortage that still isn't resolved. Banding together to celebrate drag culture.
I, as somebody who's been a longtime activist, have been very impressed.
The hot pink protection plan popping up and standing up against hate.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you, and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a wave of wild storms that are tearing through the U.S. At least 21 people are dead after dozens of tornadoes swept through parts of the Midwest and southern states. According to the country's National Weather Service, there were at least 66 reported tornadoes across 7 states, all within a span of 24 hours starting Friday morning. Fierce weather that's now left behind devastating scenes and ravaged communities in Arkansas. Reggie Cecchini looks at that damage for our top story tonight.
The howling wail of a tornado siren signaled to millions of Americans that time was running out.
Oh my God.
In Little Rock, Arkansas, a monstrous funnel swept across the city, injuring at least 40 and resulting in a level 1 mass casualty event at the city's trauma hospital.
It just brought the entire back deck up to the front and everybody was just panicking.
Just about 2 hours east in the town of Wynne, a deadly twister ravaged the local high school and decimated what for many took a lifetime to build.
I know and have every confidence that we will be back on our feet better and stronger than we ever have in quick fashion.
On Friday, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders declared a state of emergency, requesting federal assistance from Washington.
They have assured us that those resources will be here and on the ground.
The White House becoming accustomed to more frequent calls for financial help. President Biden touring Rolling Fork, Mississippi on Friday, a week after an EF4 ravaged the area.
This community is going to be rebuilt and built back better than it was before.
This most recent line of storms contained just as raw a power as any other, as experienced by this driver whose van was inside the Little Rock tornado. This system was part of a rare dual high-risk outbreak with nearly half a dozen states impacted.
This is the first time in, I believe, more than 10 years that we've had 2 areas of high risk.
Farther north in Belvedere, Illinois, severe weather is being blamed for a roof collapse at a concert venue. Video from the scene showing the frantic search for those under the rubble. More than 250 were believed to have been inside. 1 person was killed, at least 5 others taken to hospital.
The Powell Theater is one of the heritage places around here, and to see the damage is just heartbreaking.
Heartbreak that could be repeated, with the U.S. only now entering peak tornado season.
Now to the ongoing search at the Canada-U.S. border in southern Quebec, where the bodies of 8 people from an Indian and Romanian family were pulled from the St. Lawrence River after the small boat they were on sank in stormy weather on Wednesday night. Police recovered 2 bodies yesterday after 6 people were pulled from a marshy section of the riverbank on Thursday. It's believed the 2 families, including 2 children, both Canadian citizens, were trying to cross into the U.S. illegally from Canada. Police have located the overturned vessel as they continue to search for the boat's owner, 30-year-old Casey Oakes, a resident of Akwesasne, who's still missing. In the 2023 budget tabled on Tuesday, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland promised Canadians that Ottawa would find billions of dollars in savings and cut government waste. The details, she said, would come later. Our chief political correspondent David Aiken's been digging into that for us. And David, it seems one place to start is the government's phone bill.
Well, Farah, the federal government spends millions of dollars every year for phone lines, thousands of which no one uses.
Questions on the order paper?
Following questions will be answered today.
It was a written question, a so-called order paper question submitted by Conservative MP Adam Chambers.
You know, people are working differently. How many phone lines does the government pay for, firstly, and are there ones we're paying for that nobody's using?
Be tabled immediately.
The answer he got? The government last year paid about $165 million for more than 944,000 phone lines. That's both cell phones and landlines. But by the government's own admission, more than 290,000 of those lines, or 31%, were dormant. They had not received or placed a single call in 3 months or more. The government's IT department is called Shared Services Canada, or SSC. It is responsible for the phone contracts with most government departments. The minister in charge of SSC is Helena Jaczek. Jaczek was not available for an interview, but in a statement emailed to Global News from SSC, it said it had already decommissioned about 50,000 of those unused lines so far this year, and is working with other government departments to decommission most of the rest.
Inflation is significantly driving.
Chambers, who is a member of the Commons Finance Committee, says cutting wasteful spending is particularly important right now.
Former Bank of Canada governor said deficits last year are one of the reasons why interest rates have had to go higher. So if we want to have interest rates come down, we have to stop the deficits and unnecessary wasteful spending.
Cutting back on the phone bill is just one part of the Trudeau government's promise in the budget to review all government spending. The commitment made by Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, a vow to find savings of $15 billion over the next 4 years. Farah.
David Agan in Ottawa, thank you for that, David. And a new round of federal taxes targeting carbon and alcohol went into effect today, driving up the prices for patrons and at the pump as well. Canada's carbon pricing is up from $50 to $65 per ton of emissions. That means Canadians can expect to pay about 3 cents more per litre of gasoline. And from today, a new tax on alcohol will fuel a 2% increase on all beer, wine and spirits. But there is some relief. The federal minimum wage is up $1.10 to $16.65 an hour, but that only applies to federally regulated sectors. After the departure of Brenda Lucki as RCMP Commissioner, the Mounties have a new temporary boss, Interim Commissioner Mike Duhem. And he's taking the reins at a pretty difficult time. From a blistering report over the RCMP's performance over the worst mass shooting in Canadian history to growing concerns it's overstretched and under-resourced. This week on the West Block, our Mercedes Stevenson sits down with the Interim Commissioner to discuss the future of the RCMP, including how it's handling foreign interference.
It's a tough time to wear the red serge, long a symbol of Canada around the world. The RCMP now frequently finds itself under fire. But behind the scenes, the police must still carry out their work, including on foreign interference and China's attempts to meddle in Canada's democracy.
The RCMP, when it comes under the federal policing, our national security program has the mandate to investigate any criminal activity when it falls into the foreign interference space, and we are actively engaged.
Before Mike Duhem was appointed interim leader of the RCMP, he was in charge of federal policing, handling files that included foreign interference. This week on the West Block, Duhem talks about the RCMP's role in investigating and stopping foreign interference, saying the RCMP have multiple investigations underway and that he believes more charges are coming.
We have several files that we're pursuing. We've had success in some files. I think of the file that we had in the province of Quebec where there was an individual working for Hydro-Quebec. We were successful in laying charges against this individual, and we have other files that are moving forward that we will be successful in laying charges.
Asked specifically about whether the RCMP could or would charge those who were working at so-called Chinese police stations in Canada, Duhem made it clear that the RCMP is looking at options when it comes to the criminal code.
Well, if you look at if there's any form of intimidation or harassment on the community itself, that's a charge in itself. So again, we have our investigations are continuing in those matters, and if we gather enough evidence to lay the appropriate charges, we will do so.
On the show, the interim commissioner also appeals to the diaspora community to come forward and report cases of interference or intimidation to the RCMP, particularly in the cities of Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, where the Mounties have concerns. We'll also talk about the challenge of getting intelligence from CSIS, Canada's spy agency, in a way where the RCMP are actually able to act on it. Back to you.
And you can watch more of Mercedes' interview with the interim commissioner Sunday on the West Block, right here on Global. Baby formula shortages dominated headlines a year ago when the largest manufacturing plant in the U.S. shut down after a recall was issued for several powdered baby products that was linked to the deaths of infants suffering a bacterial infection. The plant in Michigan is still not working at 100% capacity. And as Katherine Ward reports, Canadian parents are still struggling to find the necessary products to feed their little ones.
You should be able to feed your child no matter what.
Julie Clark would do anything for her 8-week-old granddaughter Aubrey. Sourcing formula has been her mission.
And I tried smaller communities, larger communities, big box stores, smaller chains, and the formula shelves were just barren.
In February 2022, a formula plant in Michigan that supplied most of Canada's formula recalled a number of products following reports of bacterial infections and was forced to shut down for a period of time. Reports indicate 4 babies were infected and 2 of them died. The closure has had lasting impacts.
Well, Canada doesn't produce any baby formula for itself, so we're fully relying on the Americans.
A year later, the issue is still a nightmare as formula supply can be limited. I've had to switch 3 times, writes one mother. We can't find enough formula fast enough, another says. Each time we change, I worry that he will not be able to take the formula. Food industry researcher Sylvain Charlebois says problems continue at Abbott Nutrition in Michigan.
The Abbott plant is actually still not fully operational. That's the thing. They've had some issues with outbreaks, some food safety issues. And in January, we actually learned that the Department of Justice was actually looking into the matter, which is really never good news.
Tough times as families do whatever it takes.
We were able to allocate some of the powder in Florida, and our friends drove it home from Florida for us.
Health Canada says it is aware of parents' struggles and is working with manufacturers, but there is little clarity on when supply will improve.
Chances are parents will actually buy more, and it's hard to blame them because there's so much uncertainty.
Katherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
The neglected epidemic. Coming up, how COVID-19 hindered HIV funds despite increasing infections and advances in treatment.
Come si sente, Santo Padre? Come si sente? Ancora vivo, sai?
Pope Francis was in good spirits today. He's back in the Vatican after undergoing antibiotic treatment for bronchitis. The 86-year-old pontiff was discharged from hospital in Rome this morning. The Pope, who is suffering breathing difficulties, is now preparing to take part in a Palm Sunday service tomorrow, marking the beginning of a busy Holy Week. During the pandemic, the world's attention shifted to fighting off COVID-19. Yet another epidemic has remained. HIV AIDS. Much progress has been made since the first case was detected in Canada 4 decades ago, but there's still a long way to go to eradicate the disease. And despite calls for Canada to do more to prevent HIV and increase testing, the federal budget fell far short of what advocates were hoping for. Touria Izri explains.
When COVID-19 emerged, the push to contain another virus took a back seat.
It seems that people kind of almost forgot about HIV.
Vimbayi Munyanyara helps women living with the disease in London, Ontario, and her work is personal.
From a very young age, I've lost family members, friends, but I also have a lot of family members and friends who are living with HIV today.
She was born in Zimbabwe, a country with one of the highest rates of HIV in the world. The first documented case in Canada was 41 years ago. Science has come a long way since then. Groundbreaking discoveries like antiretrovirals, or ARTs, keep people alive and prevent transmission by making the virus undetectable. There is no cure, but researchers at the University of Ottawa are paving a way towards one, pinpointing where the virus goes in the body once it's become latent.
What we're trying to do here is not replace the antiretrovirals, but to prevent the virus from hiding. So that we can actually get rid of the virus. We've made remarkable progress in understanding the disease.
But progress costs money. The pandemic drained resources for research and slowed testing and treatment.
We're clearly moving in the wrong direction. We're somehow being complacent in thinking that this is no longer a crisis and therefore we can just go on business as usual.
Last year, the federal government spent $50 million on HIV and hepatitis C prevention, support, and testing. But aid organizations insist they need twice that, with infections increasing around 5% annually.
It's shooting up, like, from where it was. And I can only imagine I can only believe it's due to the lack of funding.
And until more action is taken, Canadians living with HIV will suffer unnecessarily, because advocates believe it's not science that's standing in the way of progress, but a lack of political will. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
Ahead, can a company own a color? One artist's anti-commodification crusade. One of the best parts of spring is the return of color into our lives, and it's something many of us take for granted. But in some ways, it can be unexpectedly challenging to access. And that's why one British artist, who's been dubbed the Robin Hood of color, is on a crusade to make sure anyone can access every shade of the spectrum. Redmond Shannon reports.
Yeah, so this is where we make all the paints in the studio.
Stuart Semple lives La Vie en Rose.
I love watching it go in.
Not just pink, yellow, green, the whole rainbow. All developed here in his studio and paint lab on the south coast of England. A renowned artist, Semple has had his work exhibited around the world. Success, he says, is just a vehicle to drive his non-profit art business.
So it's more than how do I make money, it's actually more how do I make art accessible. Well, my accountant doesn't understand it, so they get really angry every year.
The joy of art, he argues, shouldn't be a privilege of the wealthy.
And I hate the idea that art or colour or materials are sort of gate-kept in any way, shape or form.
It's all part of his mission to liberate colours, from trademarked and protected shades of paint to digital colours out of reach. Semple recently built a free software patch to help graphic designers and artists to access online palettes that suddenly disappeared behind a paywall.
And it took me about 2 or 3 hours, and then I'd created this free tone plugin.
Sorry, 2 or 3 hours?
Yeah. Yeah.
To get inside the software and fix this issue?
Yeah, and it's kind of dirty. I mean, I could have done it better if I'd have spent a bit longer, but it solved the problem. It was the patch that people needed, so I made it.
Taking on the business of big colour leaves no room for yellow bellies.
And have you consulted a lawyer?
Yeah. They always say the same thing, which is that what I'm doing is risky.
A risk, he believes, is worth taking, one shade at a time. Redmond Shannon, Global News, Bournemouth, England.
You can watch Redmond's full feature on Stuart Semple on the new reality tonight at 7, right here on Global. Next, Calgary in solidarity. Today's special day celebrating drag and the creative way people are protecting queer and trans youth. In the past few years, drag shows have exploded in popularity, but it's come at a price. Dangerous threats and hate-fueled protests have made these events a flashpoint in culture wars across Canada and in the U.S. Today in Calgary, there was an outright show of support and solidarity for the LGBTQ2+ community. Dozens of drag shows popped up at businesses around the city and beyond. Tonight, Heather Yorks West looks at Calgary's campaign of love.
Within the queer community, the last few months have been a tense time.
You guys are supporting sexualizing children.
week after week in cities across Canada and the U.S. Drag and other LGBTQ2+ events have been targeted by protesters again and again.
It's really been picking up steam since the summer, since you're seeing more of these issues being brought to lawmakers in the United States.
We wave and sing hello. Fueled by a false narrative that drag time, story hours, and other family-friendly events are sexualizing children and putting them at risk, LGBTQ2+ events have found themselves continually under threat. It's why a group of queer community members in Calgary have come together to stand up to the hate.
It's been really inspiring, actually. I, as somebody who's been a longtime activist, have been very impressed. People really just decided to come together and do something about it.
Why can't boys wear skirts and bracelets?
Organizers say a month ago, when it became clear that attacks on the queer community were intensifying and not going away, the community came together to form Queer Citizens United, or the QCU. Together, they began brainstorming ways to both protect community members while showing them citywide support.
It's scary. What we've heard from some of the younger queer folks or younger drag performers is it's scary to go into these spaces that used to bring them a lot of joy.
And so, when drag events are held now around the city, you'll find them surrounded by these hot pink fairy guardian protectors with wings 10 feet tall.
So the way that this works is you make these enormous barriers to cover up the signs and close them in, and all of the people who are participating wear earplugs. It's a non-engagement principle.
Originally called Angels, the wings were first used to protect the family of Matthew Shepard following his murder, a homophobic hate crime in 1998. 2 decades later, the Guardians have returned, ensuring a new generation of queer young people feel protected and loved. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
And that's Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your Saturday evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Canmore, Alberta. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.